Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. Well, civil society, they've played a huge role in South Africa during apartheid and even now, 31 years into democracy. Now, the civil society has had its own working group within the G20, of course, known as C20. And the question we ask ourselves is, will civil society, not just from a South African perspective, but from a global perspective, really have a voice in the decision making which will affect the citizen of the world? Joining me now, I'd like to welcome the C20 Sherpa, Thulani Tshefuta. Thulani, absolute pleasure having you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for this opportunity and the viewers as well.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Thulani, I guess the importance of civil society as a whole is quite huge within a South African context. Why was it important to have the C20 engagement group within the broader G20 context?
Well, C20 has been in existence for some time now. And more relevant for South African context is that when South Africa took over the presidency of G20, it asserted that it wants to lead a people-centered G20 process. One of the ways of giving practical expression or meaning to that was to endorse the establishment of various sectors of society into engagement groups. Hence, you would have a lot of non-state actors organized into engagement groups. For us as C20, we are the overarching civil society engagement group. Business has what you would call Business 20. There would be Y20 for youth, W20 for women, and all of those. So that's one of the practical ways in which we lead a people-centered G20 as South Africa. More than that, we do not believe that governments of the world, and including those that are organized under G20, hold the monopoly of wisdom to address and resolve all the challenges of the world and their citizens. Hence, it is important for us to be organized into these engagement groups as social partners that would play different, distinct, but complementary roles. And so, our engagement group being C20, or Civil Society 20, is then that voice that government has given an opportunity and space to respond to a question of what do the people say governments must consider in G20.
You know, it's interesting, Thulani, when we talk about the C20 and we talk about civil society, it's people-centered policy outcomes. Because at the end of the day, it's the citizen who matters in the country. Is that something that has been recognized by, let's start off with South Africa's G20 presidency and the global one overall?
We believe that South Africa has been meaningful in its engagement and giving space and opportunity to civil society and other engagement groups, because from the time we established our engagement group, we had 14 thematic working groups that were designed to influence the government policy. So the first level of our influence has been at a working group to working group level. We took it a level higher, where we have been invited to meetings of the Sherpas themselves, of governments of G20, where we have actually also participated and presented our policy packs. A step further again is that the South African decision to host a social summit that will be taking place from 18 to 20 November is the biggest platform where a unified voice of non-state actors and civil society is given an opportunity to say, what is the final mandate of influence that you say as civil society we should consider as governments?
Inequality, social cohesion, service delivery, unemployment. These are just among some of the challenges that the country faces at the moment. Can this be brought to the table? Because, I mean, I know we keep speaking about it every time there's an election, every time there's a crisis that happens at a community. And it's always the people who are voicing their opinions to say, government, you don't hear us. In a much more practical setting like this over here, surely the voices have to be louder, but also at the same time, government's ears need to be wider in listening to the problems that the people have on the streets.
Most certainly. Of greater importance for us is we can't get tired that we have raised this thing over and over again as these challenges. For as long as they persist in our communities, we will continue to advocate for those. And G20 is no less of a platform where these voices of the people must actually be made even louder. We continue to make a clarion call for a G20 that will not only be people-centered, but its outcomes must promote the creation of public value.
Yes.
Public value finds itself through what you cited already as areas like service delivery. Public value, in its essence, places people at the center of all development. It is only when you raise the base of the vulnerable and the marginalized that you can bring about equality. And therefore, we will continue to raise challenges of inequality in income, inequality in access to employment, inequality in ownership and management of the economy, and many other aspects of inequality until and unless they find to be addressed by governments of G20 and the world.
You know where the challenge comes here, Thulani, is that it's always civil society that's probably raising their voices when a lack of service delivery is happening. So, and I'd like to include the residents of certain areas. Let's take Johannesburg, for example. In Westbury, there was no water. It needed protests to happen. Sometimes it turns violent. Thankfully, there are no lives that are getting lost. But surely we shouldn't be seen as that. Surely there has to be also government being proactive. And that's where I have a lot of problems in it, because sometimes government has this knee-jerk reaction to everything. But it's the other part of society, especially civil, that has this proactive attitude to say, well, there's a service delivery issue happening at a certain area. Please come and assist. That has to change. Somehow, somewhere, it has to change. And is the G20 a sort of platform to allow that to happen?
The first thing we have said about the importance of the outcomes of G20 for us is that we don't define success as the outcome document that will be signed by all the heads of state and then read as a declaration. That is only part of for us. The biggest success starts with us, basically, and most importantly, calling for legacy projects across the different themes that will be discussed in G20. If there's a discussion on health, let's have legacy projects that will be implemented with immediate effect. We believe that is the only way in which we can close the trust deficit between governments and the people. We believe that is the only way in which people can identify with G20 and say, through our country hosting G20, we can see the practical results of the legacy projects that are implemented. Further than that, when situations of service delivery happen, as you are citing, and communities do not have water, in all honesty and likelihood, we can't blame the people who are deprived of the water.
Of course.
When the systems of governments should have actually made it easy for governments to communicate to those people. Every municipal ward in South Africa has a councillor. If lucky, even a PR councillor. It has a ward councillor, a PR councillor, and some municipal areas may even have constituency offices of members of provincial legislature and members of parliament. Why is it that we don't make those systems work for communicating with the people in advance? Because it is a legal requirement that if there is going to be any disruption in services, the municipality, through the municipal manager, including channels of wards and ward committees, must communicate to those people. And the communities rise to demand those services, rightfully so, because no one is saying anything to them, no one is committing on what will be done to address their plight of their challenges at a community level.
And that's the thing, we've got 2 minutes left, Thulani. It's in the Constitution. And I think the Constitution supersedes everything within this country. So hence you are saying the people have every right to go ahead and demand it, because the Constitution says you have the right to every basic needs of a human. And unfortunately, what we're seeing here is that many communities, and it's not just in Johannesburg, it's across the country, where the service deliveries are lacking. And these voices have to be heard. And that's where I think, and to civil society's credit, they are the ones that are bringing it up. If it's not them, who else is going to do it?
One of the most important roles of civil society is not only to protest, but to hold governments accountable. Secondly, it is civil society's responsibility to advance, advocate, and lobby for the needs of communities. And so when those challenges persist, it is civil society that will rise. But one of the things that is less said about civil society is that where there are challenges in communities, the ward councillor may be far, a municipal office may be far, government institutions may be far. It is non-governmental organizations that wake up very agilely so and respond to the challenges of communities. And so we have that different but complementary role that we have to play. The Constitution of the Republic of South Africa commits that, Section 27, citizens will enjoy progressive socio-economic rights. What that means is that the rights you enjoy today will be better than the rights you enjoyed yesterday, progressively. The rights you are going to enjoy tomorrow are almost certainly guaranteed that they must be better than the rights you enjoy today. And it is up to civil society to hold government accountable to live up to that commitment of the Constitution.
Well, we'll continue this conversation after the break. I'm in conversation with Thulani Tshefuta from the C20 years ago, serves as its Sherpa. Do stay tuned. Mzansi welcomes the world. He's back after this break. Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. I'm still in conversation with Thulani Tshefuta, who is the Civil Society 20 Sherpa in South Africa's G20 presidency. Thulani, there's something interesting you mentioned before we went to the break, trust deficit. And this has been the overarching tension between government's priorities and civil society's advocacy. Within this G20 presidency, has there been a sort of coming together of government and civil society in terms of the understanding of what the citizen needs on the ground? Because that has been the issue between government and yourselves.
To some extent, we have begun to see signs of that coming together. Because at one level, when we had our own civil society engagements, and we have been invited to government working groups, we have seen some elements of the policy proposals we have made finding expression there. And for us, that is important because it means it has been through meaningful engagement. It's not just a formality where you are invited, you take time and prepare, make policy proposals, and at the end of the day, they don't make it into the final declarations. We have seen signs of that across almost all the government working group outcome documents. And for us, we believe that that is a good starting point that then will define a program that governments of the world organized under G20 together with many non-state actors agree that indeed these are the challenges, not perceived challenges, but real genuine challenges that come through the ranks of the people to say, if these can be addressed, we will be at one with our governments. And most importantly, the issue of trust deficit. We may agree on programs, but if any of the social partners does not move swiftly and implement what it committed to do, then people will no longer have the trust and the confidence that anything we say is worth the word. Anything we sign on is worth the paper it is written on. Ours is to argue that the biggest way to close that gap between the government and the people is through action, which actions must place people at the center of all development through creating public value.
Accountability, transparency, Thulani. When I speak to various sectors of civil society, this is what they're asking for. Government, And it's not happened most of the times. A lot so when there's alleged corrupt activities that are going, when we have state-owned enterprises which went through a lot over the last few years. And also at the same time when there seems to be legislations which are not being enacted due to a lack of political will. From the C20 perspective, where does one draw the line in saying enough is enough? This has to change. And with this G20 presidency right here, South Africa has the perfect opportunity to change that.
We see every day as an opportunity to change the course. We had a dedicated working group that was focused on anti-corruption and all of those. Fundamentally, we believe that acts of corruption are stealing from the poorest of the poor in favor of private and selfish benefit. Corruption, theft, and all of those take away resources that could have been invested into education, into health, and improving the base of the poorest of the poor in South Africa. And so that should be the highest level of criminal activity that shall have ever been committed, because it is committed against the people, and the people who are the poorest, vulnerable, and even marginalized. They have no one else other than looking into the governments to develop them. Beyond that, we believe that corruption will need collective action from all of us. The smallest of acts that take place in our communities and we are tolerant to, make the public servants believe that I can live another day through these acts. Essentially, on issues of transparency and accountability, the attitude of some of the public servants has changed. Instead of them as public servants serving the public and the people, they want the people to worship them, which is one of the things that must change with the professionalization of the public service. Sure. A public servant must basically be on their toes when anyone is coming into the offices of government, or even when they go into the communities, such that they make sure if a commitment is made, it is their responsibility to go back to those communities to say, if we can't do this today as promised, definitely by tomorrow it will be done. These are the challenges that we experienced. Those will go a long way in terms of opening up the systems, holding each other accountable, and being transparent in the process.
Limited access to decision-making spaces. From a civil society perspective, it's been, as I mentioned, quite limited. You've mentioned now, and I want to take Tembisa Hospital, for example, when, of course, Papita Deokaran was slain 4 years ago. It was civil society who raised their voice and asked government what is being done, especially for the protection of whistleblowers. Now, of course, we understand that there's legislature and there's, of course, the executive, and the decision-making processes of the countries rest within those two arms of the state. How does civil society want to get involved? And has there been discussions during this G20 presidency to say there has to be a voice, a sober voice within civil society when it comes to important decision-makings of the government? Because, again, every decision that's made on the government has an effect on one and one individual only, the citizen of this country.
Currently, there are enabling platforms for that voice to be expressed. The first of those is that in the South African context, the government of national unity said it will lead an evidence-based policy regime. So it will open itself up to be influenced by evidence. And one of the ways of articulating that evidence is directly through the lived experiences of the people at a community level, at a household level, and society-wide. So that's one of the channels. Secondly, there is a plethora of platforms of public participation in South Africa, from local government to provincial government, district government, national parliament, and all of those. What is missing is being meaningful in all those consultative processes. Let me give you a practical example. If you were to take a president today to any community in South Africa, right? People in those communities will complain as if there is no ward councillor. They will complain as if there is no municipality. They will complain as if there is no constituency office, whether of the provincial legislature or of the national parliament. They will complain as if it is for the first time that they come across a representative of government. The reason that is so happening is because all these other channels I'm mentioning may not be listening to the plight of the people and acting on it and being responsive to it, such that it boils up and compiles to a point where it has to wait for a higher authority to come before they can express that. Of greater importance in that voice is not only to listen to those voices, it is to hear them and act on the advice that is being given by those voices of civil society, including taking decisions that are in favor of those voices.
We're in the final week of South Africa's G20 presidency. Is government, in your view, Thulani, as the C20 Sherpa, representing civil society, are you confident government's going to listen to all the recommendations you have given from the working group that you've represented?
Coming to this point, we must honestly commend and appreciate the willingness with which the South African government has created space for us to raise our issues. That is very important. Secondly, we appreciate the meaningful nature in which they have been engaging. We have always been clear on what we agree on and what we do not agree on, and how do we get to find each other on those. Thirdly, we fully appreciate that this is not only, the South African government can agree with us on certain advocacy issues, but they cannot unilaterally agree on behalf of all other governments of G20. Hence, our voice as C20 is not only representing the South African civil society. We represent the civil society. Actually, in this process, we're able to mobilize more than 3,000 civil society organizations from South Africa, Africa, Global South, and the rest of the world, of those that come from the G20 countries. We believe if all else stays the same, from the level of engagements that we have had, we stand in good stead to be heard by the governments of G20.
Thulani, absolute pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Mzansi Welcome to the World.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. We look forward to more engagements.
Definitely. We'll definitely have that. That's Thulani Tshefuta. He's South Africa's civil society, or called C20 Sherpa. Well, that's all we have for you here on Mzansi Welcomes the World as we count down to that G20 Leaders Summit. I'll see you again tomorrow from myself for Hospital and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. If you've missed today's episode, you'll be able to find it on our YouTube channel. From myself for Hospital, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.